faces.
Right.
In 2009, in 2014, every time he spoke, he said he was going to re-energize the Labour Party, reinvent the Labour Party, create a new team that would renew the Labour Party into the 20th century. So, I mean, does that suggest that the Labour Party
has gotten so
that
old that team has gotten so old in less than 3 years?
And still not, well, the opposite of fresh is stale.
Yeah.
No, but the thing is, you see, that can create two impressions. One is that as a leader and an astute politician, having always to change your candidates, one can say that it is good strategy. That once you get a pulse that people are not happy with the representative or the elected representative of the choice, then the best thing to do to consolidate your power and to maintain your gain at the polls is to put a new face, put a new name, okay? And to give people the impression that you want to work with them for better representation. On the other hand, what it can suggest from a leadership perspective, from a management perspective, is that you are not good at identifying the best human resource. It speaks of a certain inadequacy, and it speaks of a certain lack of judgment, that you are not able to identify persons from the Dominican population who can, of essence, make a lasting and what you call a contribution to the government, to the country, that would create a legacy of good governance. And so it could perhaps speak to his lack of judgment in identifying the right people. And while he may have been seen as a maverick in that regard, any keen observer who is knowledgeable about how you call it, leadership and management, would say that as a CEO, to be always rotating your team of managers, it speaks of two things: a bad organization or the incompetence of your people who lead. Because nobody who wants to stabilize anything would want to be always. Would you think KFC would change their CEOs or any major organization would change their CEOs thing? Just as look at what's happening in the United Kingdom. It speaks, and the Conservative Party. I mean, the Conservative Party no doubt is in shambles, and so they're trying to stay afloat. And after electing perhaps one of the most controversial and how you call it, obviously disorganized prime ministers of their era, in the name of Boris Yeltsin, of course giving them an outstanding majority in the last election. But look at what has happened. They have gone down, they have gone precipitously down the cliff of wanting to judge 4 prime ministers in 4 years. And Boris Johnson left a legacy of bad governance and bad leadership. They have repeatedly changed people, and again, so that speaks to it. And then, so what has happened? What has that done? It has created a more unstable United Kingdom. It has created a more disorganized Conservative Party. It has caused a lot of people to move away from the party, and to the extent now, if you watch and listen keenly to what is happening in the United Kingdom, the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom is the most divided now than it has ever been.
Yeah, so we'll take a look, Mr. Joseph, how, and we're bringing it back home, how the Dominica Labour Party will transition and morph out of all of these quick changes that we're seeing ever so often. 2 years now, he's brought on 17 candidates, new candidates having to change. And I know the race is now on where current MPs are trying to convince their constituents that their name will still be on the ballot box the next time around. But that's a wait and see. How much did the departure of Mr. Lennox Linton contribute to the political strategy here, the quick snap of the general election, to call a general election? And what changes do you see in the result, if any?
Very good question. Two very good questions, in the sense that I have no doubt that one of the things that Roosevelt Skerrit, or I try not to call the name too much, but I'll say the Prime Minister and leader of the Labour Party. I don't like to personalize things. It's not about Roosevelt Skerrit. It's about the leader of the Dominica Labour Party and the Prime Minister of Dominica. I think one of the things that this gentleman has always yearned for is the departure of Mr. Lennox Linton, who has been a very fierce opponent and formidable opposition leader away from the political landscape. And obviously that would be the desire of any opposing political leader. You would want to see your leader away from there. And so that played well into the playbook of his political strategy, in the sense that he I think seized the moment when the opposition seemed to have been leaderless, when the opposition was in a moment of transition, and when the opposition was in a moment, a time of seemingly disorganization to spring an election on the people. I'm absolutely certain that this being perceived as a wise move. Now, you have to be careful when you use the word wise, because sometimes there is wisdom that is shrewd, sometimes there is wisdom that is strategic. You understand? So I think it was a very shrewd move at that moment to spring an election at the time when the opposition seemed to have been, by all intents and purposes, looking for leadership or just search for a leader. So there's no doubt that that influenced his decision now. And then that's it. Now, the second question that you ask is how it's going to impact the election, right? Mm-hmm. Right. Well, from what I understood, as of this current moment, I'm not privy to any formal final decision, is that the opposition parties have decided that they will not contest the election. I'm not sure if they are going to not contest or if they're going to boycott, okay, the election. And I see that as two different things. And maybe I don't want to dwell further into it, but if one is to boycott an election, now there is precedence and there's history to people boycotting elections. Of course, we had the thing in Syria. We have had situations in Afghanistan. We've had situations in Peru. I don't know if you remember in Jamaica in 1983, the PNP did not contest the elections in Jamaica. So there is precedence to parties boycotting elections. In all, and even in Slovenia at one point, and Serbia, another point. What happened in all these cases is that the country degenerated into countries and states of chaos, okay? And it gave rise for the alienation of the opposition parties that did not contest these elections. As to whether that is going to be the case in Dominica, I'm not sure. Now, what is important to note, that is in all the instances, with the exception of Jamaica that I mentioned before, it was very clear that these opposition parties that did not contest these elections did not enjoy the possibility of winning that election. And so rather than entering elections with the possibility of being defeated heavily, they decided not to contest. That was not the case in Jamaica. I think in Jamaica it was more strategic.
Is that the case in Dominica at this moment?
Well, that is what I'm heading to. Because in Jamaica, what the PNP did at the time is that they used that opportunity to re-strategize, to reorganize, to find new leadership, and to strengthen their base, and to allow the people of Jamaica to see the incompetence of the Jamaica Labour Party at the time, which came to the fore. Because Edward Siaki at the time used the opportunity to really dominate the political landscape on Jamaica. The UWP in Dominica enjoys, you could say, a massive amount of support. In the last election, they enjoyed over 16,000 votes out of the voting thing. Now, when you look at that and you juxtapose it against the winning numbers of the Dominica Labour Party, the United Workers' Party support was solidly Dominican-based, people who resided in Dominica. The Dominica Labour Party support was largely based, or victory was largely based on their support in the ground, and a massive number of diaspora Dominicans coming in by the plane loads to vote. So what that said was that the Dominica Labour Party did not win from the support of the majority of Dominicans who live in Dominica. And so when you look at the support between both parties, one can safely say that the majority of Dominicans who live in Dominica did not support and does not support the Dominican Labour Party government. So by now they are minority government in the country. If you have to look at it like that,
well,
you understand?
If you have to look at it like that, yes, but it is very well known and common knowledge that the coffers of the Dominica Labour Party is so deep. There will be interesting times ahead as to how quick they can maybe mobilize some of that external support from the diaspora.
Oh well, I think
contributed so heavily to the last polls. But
all indications are that they have already begun spending their money. I mean, I have met friends of mine who have told me that they have already been sourced to come down to vote. And so therefore, but I think what is going to happen between you and I think by all assessments, this is going to be a sham election. Because of the fact that if the opposition parties decide not to contest
or to boycott,
or to boycott, what's going to happen on nomination day? Are there going to be nominal independent candidates? Who will they be? What amount of votes are they going to gather? And should they win a seat, what will they do? Are you going to stay singular in the opposition, or are you going to cross the other side and become members of the government? Which, I mean, because there's precedence to that in Dominica. In 1975 and 1980, there were independent candidates, people like Mr. Conrad Cyrus, who represented the Grand Fork constituency, who eventually joined the Dominica Freedom Party, and former Attorney General Jenna Amo, who contested as an independent in the Peebush constituency, and eventually went on to become the Attorney General of Eugenia Charles. So the question is, what will they do? What will they do?
Currently, the makeup is a bit different. You don't have independent MPs, but you have opposition MPs. Who everybody will be focused on what is the next move come nomination day, because they have a responsibility not to a party but to a specific constituency.
Precisely, and I think that's the dilemma.
That's the current dilemma. So interesting times ahead there. Quickly, Mr. Skerrit has said that he does not expect to go beyond the 25-year anniversary sort of given to the Dominican Labour Party through this tenure, subtly implying that his time at the helm is winding down. Speak to succession planning within the Dominican Labour Party. Who next may be in line? Because there's indication, although, that Roosevelt Skerrit moving away does not automatically translate to the name Skerrit moving out of the Prime Minister.
Good observation.
Or the
very good observation.
Government house.
I would like to say two things about that. But when he also said he's not going into 2025, he also said that he will not. He wants to lead the party into the next election and perhaps demit office in 2.5 years. I will tell you one thing. Roosevelt Skerrit is a very thoughtful psychologist and has had the indomitable reputation of knowing how to play on people's minds. But anybody who knows Roosevelt Skerrit well will tell you, if he says go right, he means go left. If he says go forward, he means go backward, because he's not somebody, the cunningness of his psychology is that he never lets people know what his plans are. Okay, so the fact that he has said he's not going to, I personally will say that he maybe hopes to give up the reins of power right after the next election. And he just doesn't want people to anticipate his next move, because he's a very diligent chess player and loves to say the word checkmate. That's part of his maneuvering, so to speak. He likes to know, well, okay, I'm telling you go there, but I'm really moving down that direction. So by the time you're expecting me to be there, I will be over there. That's the playbook of the gentleman that we are speaking about. Now you notice I mentioned his name this time. I didn't say Prime Minister. I didn't say leader of the Dominican, because you're talking about a personality there, right there. Succession planning for the Dominican Labour Party, they have always said for the past 22 years, if not Roosevelt Skerrit, who? That will be an interesting question for they themselves to answer. If not he, now who? Now that would depend on the slate of candidates that he's going to put forward. Now, every election that he has put a fresh face, to my mind, he has put in less and less competent leaders. He has basically reined in a pool or a shoal, so to say, of followers, people who admire him and worship him. And so these are not, how you call it, productively embedded qualities of leadership. Leaders emerge. I personally have not seen anyone in the Dominican Labour Party currently that has emerged as a possible replacement for the current leader of the Labour Party, because everyone who is there has never used the opportunity to demonstrate leadership, their ability to be independent, to be autonomous in thinking, and to present themselves as an alternative, which is what any healthy party does. Any healthy party does that. And so it will be left to be seen as to who are the current slate of candidates that he will nominate tonight to contest the party. Now, if the current slate that is nominated tonight are no less better than those who have been there before and are only coming in, like some of them who names have already been mentioned, are more or less worshippers of the personality who leads the party, then the Labour Party, sorry to say, unlike the days of the founding Edward Oliver LeBlanc and my father, who was a founding member of the Labour Party, people like members of my family who contested the Labour Party, and I myself, who grew up in the Dominica Labour Party, who was asked by the late Prime Minister Roosevelt Douglas to go up for the Dominica Labour Party at some point in life, in 1999, the point is, what's going to happen is you will end up again with the gentleman saying, I cannot demit office because there is no one there. So possibly this election might just be an opportunity for him to consolidate his reign on the leadership of the Dominica Labour Party and the prime ministership. Or, depending on who he nominates, it means that he would have betrayed his legacy of selection of candidates and this time chosen someone who can replace him and who can succeed in, who is able to succeed in assuming leadership of the Dominica Labour Party. So as far as I can say on that second question, it's left to be seen.
Yeah, tonight it will be interesting, the slate which is unveiled tonight. Some political observers say, don't be surprised, the name of the wife of the Prime Minister is featured prominently in candidates who will succeed him in the office of the Prime Minister.
Well, all I will say to that is that would be a serious reflection on the Labour Party's perception of the people of Dominica and also an understanding of the qualities of governmental leadership.
Fair enough, but
for governmental leadership.
Fair enough, but the astute gentleman, through his campaign commercials over the last decade, has loudly advertised that Dominica is a Skerrit country. I think that was the tagline.
Unfortunately,
the tagline.
That's unfortunate for any country. That's unfortunate for any country. No country belongs to any one man.
That's what the individual has advertised.
Right.
Finally, Mr. Joseph, do you expect any fallout from past MPs following this evening's announcement?
Well, I don't think I want to suspect or predict any of that, because that would depend, one, on how independent they are, how brave they are, how fearless they are, and how courageous they are to stand up. And on the other side, it will also depend on how dependent are they on him for their livelihoods, for their independence, or their own, need for transparency, so to speak. That would depend. Not to deviate because look at what happened in Portsmouth. It is a well-known fact that the former MP for the Portsmouth constituency, Honorable Ian Douglas, the nephew of Roosevelt Skerrit, the prime of Roosevelt Douglas, the former prime minister, was never on good terms with the current prime minister. However, he was always the chief whip, the first seconder in charge. While many times, there was even once publicly when he expressed his grievance, but he never had the, I would say, the fortitude, so to speak, in spite of his independence and in spite of the stronghold of the constituency which he held to express independence. He has silently demitted the scene. He has openly stated he's not contested and has gone silent. And a man like that, with, I think, the backing of the constituency that he has, with the influence of his family in the constituency, one would assume that someone like that, and he's a lawyer, so he has a profession, would make a statement publicly, but he has not. People have heard he does not contest, and that's it. He has gone quiet. So that speaks as an indicator of things to come as to whether anybody is going to speak up.
It also speaks of the level of control the current prime minister has over Dominica. We'll talk again, Mr. Joseph.
You said it, not me.
We'll talk again very soon, especially when we get closer to polling day, to speak about some of the issues which are going to weigh in on voters' minds, to see exactly what's the strategy from the political opposition.
I'll tell you one thing. What's on voters' minds is, by and large, Dominicans are suffering. Dominicans are fed up. Dominicans are expressing a lot of discontent and a lot of dissatisfaction with their income, with the economy, with their livelihoods, with the social conditions of the country. And even many people who support the Dominica Labour Party privately will express a lot of discontent and dissatisfaction with the country, but they live in fear. And so just bear with me a minute. Dominicans have never voted on issues. Dominicans have always voted on a sort of messianic idol figure. And in recent past, I would say, in the recent past, okay? And even so, one of the sad realities of Dominican politics is that personalities have always taken precedence over policies and philosophies. And that's very sad. Yeah. People have always been able to promote people over what is good for the country.
That's why that's why I tell you quickly, don't be surprised if the name of the MP for Central Roseau comes close to that of your next prime minister.
Her victory was largely due to the color of her skin, the texture of her hair, and her family background. Yeah. And there, unfortunately, in the Caribbean, there are people who worship high-color people, thin hair, and high names. Unfortunately, that is one of the lasting legacies of colonialism and bourgeois social elite, pseudo-social elite that exists, that people are still, how you call it, magnified and awed by good looks. And it's an issue in politics, sadly, in the Caribbean.
Caribbean politics. Thanks for coming in, Mr. Yeah. Joseph. We'll talk again soon.
Have a good day.
On the heels of the...
And allow me to express my co-sympathy with the people of St. Lucia on the flooding that you experienced, because we in Dominica sadly experienced the same thing. And it is even more egregious that an election was called the very night in Dominica that people were without lights, people were lost, people could not be found, roads were closed, landslides came down. And while people were looking to see if their families were alive, they did not have water. They did not have food. Their houses were flooded. And the devastating situation that people were in and the emotional stress that people were going through. The best thing that could have been done by a leader of a country on that very night, while people were wondering whether their loved ones were alive or whether they had a house or a shelter over their head or they could access their loved ones, is to call an election.
The Prime Minister will respond and say, hope is at the polls. We'll talk again soon, Mr. Joseph. Thank you very much.
Hope is a relative term.
Thanks so much for coming in. Political observer, Dominican at heart, coming in on the first part of this discussion. We'll talk to a former government minister over in the Commonwealth of Dominica in just a bit. And we'll also hear from Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit. Interesting times in Caribbean politics. I sure know that there are some lessons for other political organizations across the Caribbean, particularly opposition parties, as we continue to monitor what unfolds in Dominica. Stay with us. We'll be back next to hear from the Prime Minister, and then later we'll bring on a former government minister on Beyond the Headlines today, Tuesday.
Ooh la la! See what's new at Quartz. We've got great deals on living and dining room sets, appliances, electronics, and smart devices, and more. Shop today with no cash using Quartz Ready Finance, 3 to 48-month payment plans available. Shop in store or online at shopquartz.com. Come see what's new at